You might have heard that I'm going to talk to you today about inclusion. And that's true, and in fact, in the last year and a half, I've spoken to about 15,000 people about an idea that I've termed universal inclusion. The thing is, in all these talks, I've found that when I say the word inclusion, it brings to mind for people the ideas of disability, of accommodation, and of obligation. I'm not going to talk about any of those things today. Instead of disability, I'm going to focus you on talent. Instead of accommodation, we're going to focus on empowerment. Instead of obligation, we're going to focus on opportunity. Let me give you a quick story to set the frame. 20 years ago, there was a small woodworking company in Michigan that was experiencing a strong need for people during a labor shortage. They needed people to do jobs that really weren't very exciting. Stacking wood, punching holes in metal, and operating a large saw. One day, they were approached by an agency who focused on placing people with disabilities in jobs to ask if they wanted to partner. Frankly, at this point, they were willing to get labor wherever they could, so they said, sure. After a certain number of tries, they had their first successful hire, and they began to build on the idea to get more. From the first one, they hired someone with a short-term memory problem, but a really strong back to stack wood. They hired a blind person that they were able to teach to operate a heavy machine, and even a deaf person who could operate a saw by feeling the vibrations that were often listened for. I don't know about you, but I don't hear a story about disability and accommodation here. I hear a story about supply and demand. There was a high demand for talent and a very low supply. There was talent with disabilities ready to be empowered and a business ready to take advantage of this opportunity. The foreman who mapped out the machine for the blind person and the manager who trained the employee to listen and feel the vibrations weren't thinking about accommodating a disability. They were thinking about meeting a business need. They didn't care about abstract questions of social good. Frankly, neither do I. I care about what works, and that's adding value. If I finish with you today, and all I've done is get you to think about the opportunities that await you in enabling people with disabilities to contribute their talents to your organization, then that's a win. If I get you focused on the idea that the best board member you ever had might be a deaf person, that your future general counsel might be a blind person, or that your most valued member might have an intellectual disability, making you eager to access their talent, then we are halfway there. But I want to bring you even further. My best friend has heard an awful lot of my speeches, and he always says that one of the most powerful ideas that I offer is the idea that the Yale campus where we met, if it had not been accessible, we never would have met. A guy from Connecticut and a guy from Louisiana, if we just hadn't found ourselves in the same spot, we never would have met. All of the wonder that we've brought to each other's lives in the last 20 years never would have happened. Who are you missing out on, I ask you, when they can't even get through your door, or when you can't communicate with them, or if any other barrier keeps them out? What about the board member or the general counsel that I mentioned before? Would you even know that they turned away before coming to one of your events because the building was inaccessible? Or didn't apply for a job because you hadn't indicated an openness to deaf applicants? The only way to avoid this missed opportunity and this missed talent is by being prepared to empower them before they show up. Once they leave, it's too late. This doesn't mean that you implement interpreters at your interviews for hearing people, but it does mean that you have an interpreter service on speed dial for when a qualified deaf person applies, and a clear message sharing that fact. It doesn't mean that you've thought of how every person with every disability could fill every role at your company. It does mean that your managers are prepared to listen to an applicant and work with them to figure out how their talent could fill a role. Do this, and you'll be 2/3 on your way to realizing the value that universal inclusion represents. But I want to help you really maximize the opportunity. To really maximize the opportunity, I invite you to shift your thinking from empowering people with disabilities to empowering everybody. Spoiler, remember I called it universal inclusion. Think about it. If you can make an employee more productive by empowering them to overcome a barrier that they face, do you really care whether that barrier was the result of a disability? Let me give you an example. My voice recognition software happens to be the only way that I can type. But what about other employees? According to statistics provided in a recent review of the software that I use, the average educated person, that's all of us, types about 40 words per minute. The average professional typist types about 100 words per minute. The average person speaks at about 150 words per minute. Voice recognition these days is instantaneous. It can transcribe as fast as you can talk, and it's less than $200 even without a sale. Isn't it worth $200 to make every employee 50% faster than a professional typist? I ask you to think, how many other accommodations fit this need? So I want you to leave today with a sense of urgency, preoccupied by the opportunities that you might be missing if you're not empowering people with disabilities and prepared to empower them further to overcome any barriers that they encounter. Then I want you to evaluate your organization and think about how you would empower people with all kinds of barriers to offer you their talents. What do they already do? What do you already do? How would you expand on it to get the most out of your current and your future talent, whether or not they have a disability? What barriers have you not thought about, and how might you address them? Then, go do it. Until you do, you have no idea what you're missing. Thank you.